The sun over that dusty frontier town wasn't just hot, it was angry. It beat down on the crowd like a hammer, turning the air into a shimmering haze that smelled of sweat, hot leather, and the ghost of old gunpowder. In the center of it all, on a rickety wooden block, stood a woman. Her hands were tied tight with rope that dug into her skin. A dirty veil covered her face, but you could feel the eyes of every man in that crowd trying to burn right through it. The auctioneer, a man with a smile as slick as snake oil, raised his hands. His voice boomed across the square. Now, folks, a rare opportunity. Fresh from the East, a young woman with all the qualities you could ask for in a wife. He paused for effect, letting the words hang in the thick, dusty air. Fine hands, a strong back, and no family to stand in the way of her new master. The crowd rumbled, a low, hungry sound. On the block, Eliza felt her world shrink. All she could hear was the pounding in her chest and the scrape of her own boots in the dirt. The faces were a blur of leering grins and greedy eyes. These men weren't just looking at her. They were looking through her, seeing an object, a prize, a thing to be owned. She squeezed her fists, the rope biting deeper. The life she once had, the daughter of a respected man, a woman with a future, felt like a dream from another lifetime. Her father's debts, the man who had promised to help but instead sold her out. It had all led to this. Standing on a block, waiting for the bidding to start on her own soul. "Who'll start the bidding?" the auctioneer cried, his voice sharp and eager. "A fair price for a fine woman, no husband to worry about. She's as free as the wind." The lie stung worse than any whip. Free? She was a prisoner in her own skin. A rough-looking man in the front row raised a grimy hand. $50, he shouted. The auctioneer's smile widened. $50. Do I hear 55? Another man, his eyes like a predator's, grinned and raised his hand. 55. Eliza's stomach turned to ice. Each bid was another nail in her coffin. Each man saw a possession, not a person. This was it. This was how her story was going to end. But then something shifted in the crowd. A figure emerged from the back, moving with a purpose that made people step aside without even thinking. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in faded leather that looked like it had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. A wide-brimmed hat threw a deep shadow over his face, hiding his eyes. He didn't slow down. He didn't hesitate. He walked right through the parting crowd until he stood before the auction block, his boots kicking up little puffs of dust. The bidding stopped. The whole square went silent. The man's shadowed eyes locked onto the auctioneer. He spoke, and his voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "I'll take her." The auctioneer blinked, his oily smile faltering. He looked at the stranger, a flicker of confusion, then suspicion in his eyes. The crowd just stared, waiting. This wasn't part of the show. The man in the hat, Jedediah Walker, though no one there knew his name, didn't move a muscle. He had a stillness about him that was more dangerous than any threat. He was not a man who asked for things. He was a man who took them. "You heard me," Jed said, his voice a low rumble. "The bidding is over. I'll take her." The auctioneer tried to puff out his chest to get the control back. "Now hold on, sir. You'll need to put up a bid like everyone else." A thin, cold smile touched Jed's lips, but it never reached his eyes. "No need for bids. Name your price, the highest one you can imagine, and then sell her to me. Now." His tone was flat, final. It left no room for argument. The air grew thick with tension. The crowd wasn't just curious anymore. They were scared. They could feel it. This wasn't some rancher looking for a wife. This was something else entirely. "What's your name, stranger?" the auctioneer stammered, his bravado melting away under the stranger's unseen gaze. Jed didn't answer him. Instead, for the first time, he looked up at Eliza. His eyes weren't filled with pity or lust like the others. They were assessing, calculating, like a man looking at a map or a key. For a split second, their gazes locked, and Eliza felt a jolt go through her, a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hope. It was something else. She was just a piece in a game she didn't understand. But she had a terrible feeling the game had just changed, And this man was the one changing it. The auctioneer, sweating now, tried one last time. You think you can just walk in here and take her? This is a legal sale. Jed took one step closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. You have no idea who I am, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that everyone could hear. You don't know what I'm capable of, and you don't know why I'm here for her. A nervous shudder went through the crowd. This was no ordinary drifter. The auctioneer looked at the hard, unyielding man before him. He looked at the silent, watchful crowd, and he made a decision. Survival. Fine, he spat, his voice dripping with resentment. She's yours. Jed's eyes never left Eliza. He walked to the block, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. He reached out, and with a surprisingly gentle touch, he untied the ropes from her wrists. His fingers brushed her skin, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt a spark of warmth. Then he lifted the veil from her face. He didn't smile. He just studied her, his eyes intense, searching. She felt pinned by his gaze, unable to look away. You're free now, Jed said, his voice quiet. Then he leaned in closer, so only she could hear the next words. But not in the way you think. He led her away from the block, and the crowd parted like the sea. The auction was over, but Eliza knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the real trouble was just beginning. Who was this man? And what did he mean he was here? For her. As they reached his horse at the edge of the square, the sun bleeding across the horizon, she realized she wasn't just a woman he'd bought. She was a message. She was a weapon. And she had just been claimed by a man who looked like he knew exactly how to use one. The sun vanished as if a switch had been flipped, and the desert night turned cold. Jedediah Walker led Eliza away from the last lingering lights of the town, the sounds fading into the immense dark silence of the wilderness. She shivered, but it wasn't just from the cold. Jed had untied her, but she felt more trapped than ever. 1,000 questions burned in her mind, but she didn't dare ask a single one. Finally, Jed's voice cut through the darkness. No need to thank me. Her head snapped up. His tone was flat, devoid of emotion. It put her on edge. Men who did things like this always wanted something. I didn't ask you to, she said, her own voice sounding rough and foreign to her ears. Why did you do it? Why buy me? Jed didn't look at her. He just kept walking, leading his horse, his eyes scanning the black horizon. A man like me doesn't do things for free, he said. The words were a confirmation of her worst fears. Then he added something that made the hair on her arm stand up. And I didn't buy you, Eliza. I claimed you. There's a difference. A bitter knot formed in her chest. Claimed. Like a piece of land. Like a lost dog. She wasn't free at all. She had simply been transferred from a cage with many masters to a cage with only one. But there was something else in his voice. Something that sparked a dangerous curiosity inside her. You've got a lot of questions, Jed said, as if reading her mind. But we've got a long ride ahead. Save them. They walked on in silence, the only sounds the soft thud of their boots and the horse's hooves on the hard-packed earth. Hours crawled by. The world was nothing but shadows and stars. Eventually, a small fire appeared in the distance, a tiny spark of life in the vast emptiness. It was a camp, a small clearing in a cluster of mesquite trees. Jed dismounted and began setting things up with an efficient, practiced ease. He moved like a man who had spent his entire life alone, in places like this. Eliza stayed on her horse, frozen, unsure what to do next. The firelight danced across his face, carving sharp angles out of the shadows. His jaw was set, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was hard like the country around them, a man who took what he wanted and broke whatever stood in his way. He finally turned to her. You hungry? She shook her head. The idea of food was impossible. All she could feel was the crushing weight of her new reality. You'll need to eat, Jed said. His tone wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. I'm not asking. Something in his voice, a simple assertion of authority without any malice, made her move. She slid off the horse and walked cautiously toward the fire. He handed her a bowl of beans and meat. It was simple food, but the way he offered it felt different. Not like a master to a slave, more like a truce. She took it, keeping her distance. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Just let me go." Jed's eyes met hers across the fire, and for a second she saw a flicker of something she didn't expect. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to understanding. "I don't think you're ready for that," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Not yet." "Why?" The word broke from her lips, filled with all the frustration and fear she'd been holding in. "Why me? You could have just left me there." He sat down across from her, the firelight making his face a mask of light and shadow. He stared into the flames for a long time before he spoke. "I didn't claim you because I felt sorry for you," he began, his voice low and steady. "And I sure as hell didn't claim you because you need saving. You're stronger than you know." He paused, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I did it because there's something you need to understand. About this world. About your father." Eliza froze, the bowl trembling in her hands. Her father? How could this man possibly know about her father? What about my father?" she stammered. Jed looked up from the fire, his eyes drilling into hers. "I've been where you are, Eliza. I know what it feels like to lose everything." "You've lost everything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jed's lips tightened into a hard line. "I lost enough to know that nothing's ever really gone," he said, his voice turning cold. "Not if you don't let it be. Not when someone leaves something behind." The words were a riddle, and she was too tired and scared to solve it. What did her father leave behind? Debts, shame, nothing more. Jed stood up abruptly, breaking the spell. "We head out at first light. You'll ride with me, no more running." She stared at him, her mind reeling. What did he want from her? What did any of this have to do with her father? A man long dead and buried. "You want me to be something I'm not," she said, her voice shaking. "You think I'm strong, but I'm nothing. I have nothing." Jed's gaze softened for just a moment. "You don't get to decide that. You've been through hell, Eliza, but you're still standing. That's not nothing." He looked down at her wrist, the one that had been bound by the ropes. "Your father was a clever man. He knew how to hide things in plain sight." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned away. She had to follow him, for now, but that didn't mean she would surrender. "You're wrong about me," she said to his back, her voice finding a sliver of defiance. "You think you can control me? You can't." Jed didn't turn around. He just nodded, as if he expected her to say it. "We'll see," he said quietly to the darkness. "We'll see." As Eliza watched the last embers of the fire dance and die, she made a silent promise to herself. This man, Jedediah Walker, thought he had claimed her, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. He was looking for something her father had hidden, and she would find it first. The sun rose fast and brutal, bleaching the color from the desert sky. Jedediah Walker was already up, moving with the silent efficiency of a predator. He saddled the horses, his hands sure and quick, his mind clearly somewhere else. Eliza watched him from her bedroll, the unease from the night before coiled in her stomach like a cold snake. Every word he'd spoken was a piece of a puzzle she couldn't solve. Your father. Hide things in plain sight. What did it mean? Her father had been a merchant, a good man who fell on hard times. What could he have possibly hidden? The silence between them was heavier than the morning heat. It was filled with everything he wasn't telling her. She was no longer just a captive. She was a clue. And Jed was the detective. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and commanding. We ride now. Stay close and stay quiet. We've got a long way to go. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She swung herself into the saddle, hating the feeling of being led, of having her fate decided by this grim, mysterious man. But for now, rebellion was a luxury she couldn't afford. They rode for hours, the landscape a monotonous blur of sand, rock, and shimmering heat. The world felt empty, a vast wilderness that could swallow them whole without a trace. It was a land that didn't care if you lived or died. Just when she thought the silence would drive her mad, Jed spoke. You want to know where we're headed, don't you? She glanced at him, surprised. I was wondering, she said, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. I still don't know what you want with me. Jed's expression didn't change. I told you, I'm not a hero, Eliza, and I'm not your enemy. I'm a debt collector. Your father, Silas, owed me something. He died before he could pay. Her blood ran cold. My father was an honest man. He didn't owe anyone anything. Jed let out a short, harsh laugh. Your father was a lot of things, but honest wasn't one of them. He and we were in a business together, a very profitable business. We found something out here in this wasteland, something worth more than gold, and then he vanished, with my half. Eliza stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. Her gentle, kind father, a partner to this hard, dangerous man? A thief? It was impossible. It had to be a lie. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Jed's eyes were like chips of flint. He left you with nothing, didn't he? Lost the family home, sold off everything. You think that was just bad luck? No. He was running, he was hiding, and he used you, his own daughter, as the key to his treasure. Her mind reeled, the debts, the sudden poverty, the whispers from the townspeople. It all started to click into place in a horrifying new way. The key? She asked, her voice trembling. He was smart, Jed said, his gaze dropping to her hands, which were clenched tight on the reins. He knew his enemies would search his maps, his letters, his house. They'd never think to search his daughter. Before she could process the terrifying implication of his words, he reined in his horse. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the clouds in shades of orange and blood. We rest here, he said, dismounting. He began gathering firewood as if he hadn't just shattered her entire life with a few sentences. She got off her horse, her legs unsteady. She had to know. She had to understand. As the fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows, she finally found her voice. What was it? What did you and my father find? Jed looked up from the fire, his face a grim mask in the flickering light. He hesitated as if debating whether to tell her. We found the lost San Esteban mine, he said, his voice barely a whisper. A Spanish silver mine that vanished from all the maps 200 years ago. It's not just a legend, Eliza. It's real. And your father hid the map to it. He stared at her intently. And I think he hid it on you. Eliza felt a wave of dizziness. A map? On her? It was insane. She would know. Wouldn't she? Her mind raced, searching for any clue, any memory. A strange birthmark on her back her father had always called her Little Map of the Stars? A lullaby he used to sing with a strange, winding melody? It was all so confusing. Jed's gaze hardened. He was about to say more when a sound cut through the night, the distant, unmistakable thunder of approaching horses. Jed was on his feet in an instant, his hand flying to the revolver at his hip. The man who had been calm and calculating was gone. In his place was a cornered wolf, ready to fight. Stay here, he ordered, his voice a low growl. Don't make a sound. He melted into the darkness at the edge of the camp. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Who was coming? Who else knew about the mine? Were these her father's enemies? Or Jed's? A moment later, a single rider emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the rising moon. Jed's voice challenged him from the darkness. Who's there? The rider didn't answer. He just moved closer, slow and deliberate. The firelight glinted off something on his chest. A badge. A lawman. Jed's voice was a snarl. I told you to stay away. The rider finally stopped just outside the circle of light. He spoke, and his voice was cold and familiar. A voice Eliza had heard in her nightmares. It was the voice of the man who had betrayed her family, the man who had sold her to the auctioneer. Mr. Davies. But he wasn't a respectable town merchant anymore. He was wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal. Walker, the Marshal said, his voice dripping with false authority. You've made a terrible mistake. That girl is evidence in a federal investigation. You're under arrest for kidnapping. Eliza's blood turned to ice. It was a lie. A trap. Davies wasn't a lawman. He was one of the enemies her father was running from, and he had just found them. Jed let out a cold, humorless laugh from the shadows. Kidnapping? You're the one who sold her on a block, Davies. Or should I say, Marshal Davies? Davy's face twisted into a sneer. Enough talk. You're coming with me, and the girl is coming home. But his eyes weren't on Jed. They were on Eliza, a hungry, possessive look. He didn't see her as evidence. He saw her as the key, the same way Jed did. Suddenly, more riders appeared, fanning out, their guns drawn. They were trapped. Damn it, Jed muttered. He glanced back at Eliza, his eyes blazing. Get on your horse, now! He didn't wait for her to argue. He lunged back into the firelight, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her toward the horses. His grip was like iron. I'm not leaving you, she cried, stumbling after him. You don't have a choice, he snarled. You stay. He gets the map. He gets everything. Marshal Davies stepped forward, pulling out a pair of shiny handcuffs. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Walker. In that split second, the world exploded. Jed's revolver was in his hand, a blur of motion. It bucked and roared, the sound echoing through the canyon. Davies cried out, staggering back, clutching a bloody shoulder. He hadn't expected Jed to be that fast, but his men were already charging. Move! Jed yelled, shoving Eliza toward her horse. She scrambled into the saddle, her body acting on pure survival instinct. The horse leaped forward and the camp disappeared behind her in a chaos of shouting and gunfire. A bullet hissed past her ear, so close she felt its heat. She clung to the reins, her eyes locked on Jed's back as he led them away from the ambush, straight into the dark, unforgiving maw of the desert. He wasn't just running, he was leading them somewhere. With a sharp turn, he guided his horse up a steep, rocky ridge. Eliza followed, her horse scrambling for purchase on the loose shale. Behind them, the pursuit faltered as the terrain grew more difficult. They had a lead, but it wouldn't last. At the top of the ridge, Jed turned to her, his face grim in the moonlight, a fresh cut bleeding on his cheek. You need to trust me now, he said, his voice raw with urgency. Everything you think you know is a lie. Your father wasn't the man you remember. She stared at him, breathless, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Trust him? The man who called her father a thief? But then she thought of Marshal Davies' cold, dead eyes. She had no choice. There's a place ahead, Jed said, pointing toward a narrow black slit in the distant cliffs. An old prospector's hideout. It's our only chance to make a stand. They spurred their horses on, the sounds of the posse growing fainter behind them. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. She was the map, and every man out here in this wasteland was willing to kill to be the one to read it. As they plunged into the narrow canyon, the rock walls rising up on either side like closing jaws, she felt a strange, cold certainty. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the prize, and the war for her had just begun. The narrow pass was a maze of shadow and stone. Jed led them through it with a confidence that told Eliza he'd been here before. The sounds of Davies' posse had faded, lost in the confusing echoes of the canyon. For a moment, they were safe, but it was the kind of safety that feels like holding your breath underwater. Sooner or later, you have to come up for air. They finally reached a small, hidden cave, tucked behind a waterfall of rock. It was barely big enough for them and the horses. Jed dismounted, his movements quick and tense. He immediately started checking his revolver, reloading the spent chamber. They'll block both ends of the canyon, he said, not looking at her. They'll wait for sunrise and then sweep through. We don't have much time. Eliza slid off her horse, her body aching, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Time for what? To die? Jed finally looked at her, and his eyes were burning with an intensity that startled her. Time to figure this out. Davies isn't a real marshal. He works for the Blackwood Company. It's the same group that ran your father out of his home, the same group that's been hunting him for years. The Blackwood Company? She asked. The name meant nothing to her. They're not a company, Jed explained, his voice low and grim. They're more like a private army. They buy up land. They take over mines. They control everything and everyone from here to the mountains. Your father and I, we didn't just find the San Esteban mine. We stole the original Spanish land grant for it right from under Blackwood's nose. That grant is the only thing that proves legal ownership. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That's what Davies wants. Not just the map. He wants the grant, and your father hid them both. Suddenly, a memory sparked in Eliza's mind. a small, ornate wooden box her father kept. He'd told her it held old family papers. On the day he disappeared, he'd made her promise to keep it safe, to never let anyone else see it. She still had it, tucked away in the false bottom of her travel trunk, the trunk Davy's men had seized when they took her. "The box," she whispered. "My father gave me a box." Jed's eyes widened. "What did it look like?" She described it. The dark wood, the silver hinges, the intricate carving on the lid. A grim smile touched Jed's lips. "The grant," he breathed. "He hid the grant with you, but your things were taken to the auction house. They're still in town." The hopelessness of their situation crashed down on her. "So it's over. They have it." "No," Jed said, his jaw set. "They don't know what it is. Davies thinks the map is the only thing that matters. He'll assume the box is just worthless trinkets. He's cocky. That's his weakness." He began pacing the small cave like a caged animal. "We have one chance, a crazy one. We have to go back." Eliza stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Go back? To the town? They'll be waiting for us?" "They'll be waiting for us here," he corrected. "Davies will have every man he's got guarding this canyon. He thinks he has us trapped. He won't be expecting us to double back. We can slip into town while they're all out here hunting for ghosts." It was insane. It was suicidal, but it was also the only plan they had. "How?" she asked. "Even if we get past them, the town is full of Davies' men." Jed stopped pacing and looked at her. "Your father taught you to read and write, didn't he? To be clever?" She nodded. "Good," Jed said. "Because we're not going in with guns blazing. We're going to steal it back right from under their noses." He explained the plan. It was audacious, relying on timing, deception, and pure nerve. He knew of a secret entrance into the auction house cellar, a forgotten tunnel used by smugglers years ago. While he created a diversion on one side of town, she would have to slip in, find her trunk, and retrieve the box. "You're asking me to do this alone?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're not alone," he said, his gaze steady. "I'll be drawing their fire, but you're the only one who knows what to look for. You're the only one who can do this part." He put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You told me you weren't nothing. You told me you were strong. Here's your chance to prove it." His words, meant to inspire her, felt like a crushing weight. The fate of everything, the mine, her father's legacy, their very lives rested on her. Under the cover of darkness, they made their move. They left the horses creeping back through the canyon on foot, moving from shadow to shadow. It was a nerve-wracking journey, every snapped twig, every dislodged pebble sounding like a cannon shot in the silence. They could hear the distant shouts of Davy's men as they began their sweep of the canyon, just as Jed had predicted. They reached the outskirts of the town as the first hint of dawn touched the sky. The place was a ghost town, almost everyone having joined the posse. "This is it," Jed whispered, pointing to a dusty, dilapidated general store. "The auction house is behind it. The tunnel entrance is in the storm cellar." He pressed a small, single-shot derringer into her hand. "Just in case. I'll give you 20 minutes. Then I'm going to set fire to the old livery stable at the far end of town. When they all run to fight the fire, that's your chance to get out. Meet me at the old mission on the hill." He looked at her one last time. "Don't get caught, Eliza." Then he was gone, a phantom disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. She was alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped behind the general store. She found the cellar doors, swollen and warped with age. With a surge of adrenaline, she pried them open and descended into the damp, musty darkness. The tunnel was small and smelled of earth and decay. Spiders brushed against her face as she crawled through the tight space. It felt like being buried alive. After what seemed like an eternity, her hands found a wooden wall. She pushed, and a section of shelving swung inward, depositing her into the auction house cellar. It was packed with confiscated goods, a sad museum of broken lives. Trunks, furniture, clothes, all piled high. She began a frantic search, her hands shaking as she moved from one trunk to the next. It was hopeless. There were dozens of them. Then she saw it, tucked away in a corner, her own modest trunk. Her fingers fumbled with the latch. She threw it open, tossing her few belongings aside until her hand touched the false bottom. It was still there. She slid it open. The ornate wooden box was inside, cool and solid in her trembling hands. Relief washed over her, so powerful it almost made her dizzy. She had it. Just as she was about to close the trunk, her fingers brushed against something else tucked into the lining. A folded piece of paper. She pulled it out. It was a letter. A letter in her father's handwriting, addressed to her. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "My dearest Eliza," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I have failed to protect you. I am so sorry. There is so much I never told you. Jedediah Walker is a good man, but he does not know the whole truth. He believes I betrayed him, that I hid the map to keep the silver for myself. But the truth is, I hid the map to protect it. The San Esteban mine isn't just silver, my dear. It's something far more dangerous. The Spanish didn't just abandon it, they sealed it for a reason. There is a sickness in that mine, a poison in the rock that drives men mad. I saw what it did to the prospectors who got too close. The Blackwood Company doesn't care. They will unleash a plague upon this land for profit. You must not let Jed, in his anger, lead you there. You must destroy the map. It is the only way." Below the signature was a drawing, a strange pattern of stars and lines. The map. It wasn't on her. It was in the letter. A deafening roar from outside shook the building. The livery stable. Jed had started the diversion. Shouts and running footsteps echoed through the town. This was her chance to escape. But her mind was reeling from her father's words. A poison? A sickness? Jed hadn't said anything about that. Was he lying to her? Or did he truly not know? Her father's letter said he was a good man, but blinded by his anger and his lust for silver. He wanted justice for her father's betrayal. He would walk right into a trap and take her with him. She clutched the letter in the box. She had a choice to make. Trust the man who had saved her, or trust the final words of the father she had loved. She had to get to the mission, but she had no idea what she was going to do when she got there. Suddenly, she heard footsteps on the floorboards above her. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Someone was in the auction house. She hadn't been as alone as she thought. She quickly hid the letter and the box in her dress, her heart pounding. The small derringer in her hand felt impossibly heavy. The cellar door creaked open, and a sliver of light cut through the darkness. A pair of dusty boots appeared on the stairs. It wasn't Jed, and it wasn't one of Davies's thugs. It was the auctioneer, the man with the snake oil smile, and he was holding a lantern in one hand and a very large shotgun in the other. His eyes scanned the cellar, and his smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "I knew someone would come back for this junk," he said, his voice a low hiss. "Davies is an idiot. He thinks the prize is out in the canyon. But I know Silas Croft. He was always cleverer than that." His eyes landed on Eliza's open trunk, and then they found her, hiding in the shadows. His smile returned. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "Well, well," the auctioneer said, raising the shotgun. "Look what we have here. The key, the lock, and the prize, all in one place." The shotgun barrel looked like a dark tunnel leading straight to oblivion. The auctioneer, his face lit from below by the lantern, looked like a demon. "Don't even think about screaming," he hissed. "No one's coming to save you. They're all enjoying the bonfire your friend started." Eliza's mind raced. Jed was waiting. Davies was in the canyon. This man, this seemingly minor player in the whole drama, was the one who held all the cards. "You work for Blackwood," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady. The derringer was cold in her palm, hidden in the folds of her dress. The auctioneer laughed, a dry rattling sound. "Work for them? My dear, I am Blackwood, in this town at least. Davies is just a hired gun with a shiny badge. I'm the one who pulls the strings here. I'm the one who arranged your little auction, hoping to draw out anyone who might know what you're worth. I must say," he added, his eyes glinting with greed, "it worked even better than I'd hoped. Walker showed up, just like I knew he would. The twist was so sharp it left her breathless. He had orchestrated the entire thing. The auction was bait. Jed had walked right into his trap. "Now," the auctioneer said, stepping closer, "give me the box and the map." I know Silas. He would have made sure you had both. Eliza's hand tightened on the derringer. Her father's warning echoed in her head. Destroy the map. The mine was a poison. This man, driven by pure greed, would unleash it without a second thought. She had to make a choice. Right now. The box is here, she said, stalling for time, her eyes darting around the cluttered cellar. But the map. I don't have it. The auctioneer's smile tightened. Don't lie to me, girl. I know it's on you somewhere. A tattoo, a brand, a scar. Silas was a sentimental fool like that. He didn't know about the letter. This was her only advantage. As he took another step, his boot caught on a loose floorboard. He stumbled for a fraction of a second. It was all the time she needed. She fired the derringer. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The auctioneer screamed, not in pain, but in fury as the small bullet tore through the fleshy part of his arm. He dropped the lantern, which shattered on the floor, the oil spilling and igniting instantly. Flames erupted, racing across the dry floorboards and licking up the piles of confiscated goods. The cellar was turning into an inferno. The auctioneer, clutching his arm, lunged for her, his face a mask of rage. She scrambled backward, away from the shotgun, and ran for the tunnel. Smoke was already filling the air, thick and black. She crawled back through the suffocating darkness of the tunnel, the heat of the fire on her heels. She burst out of the cellar doors and into the gray dawn, gasping for air. The whole town was lit by the orange glow of two fires now, the livery stable and the auction house. She didn't look back. She ran. She ran through the deserted streets, her lungs burning, her only thought to get to the mission on the hill. She clutched the box and the letter, the two things that could either save the world or destroy it. She found Jed at the rendezvous point, his face etched with worry. When he saw her, relief washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by alarm when he saw the smoke billowing from the center of town. What happened? He demanded. It's the auctioneer, she panted. He's Blackwood. He was waiting for me. Before Jed could react, she thrust the letter into his hands. You have to read this. It's from my father. Jed's brow furrowed in confusion, but he took the letter. He read it by the growing light of the dawn and the fires. Eliza watched his face, saw his expression shift from suspicion to shock, to disbelief, and finally to a dawning horror. A poison? He whispered, looking up from the letter, his eyes wide. He never told me. He said your anger blinded you, Eliza said softly. He was trying to protect you, to protect everyone. The sound of a single gunshot echoed from the town below, followed by a chorus of shouts. Davies and his posse were back. They had seen the second fire and realized they'd been tricked. They've got the auctioneer, Jed said, his mind clearly working fast. He'll tell them everything. He'll tell them where we are. They were out of time. They had no horses. The posse would be on them in minutes. The map, Jed said, his voice urgent. Your father said to destroy it. He looked at the letter in his hand, then at her. He was a better man than I ever knew. What do we do? Eliza asked, her voice desperate. Jed looked past her, up the hill toward the old Spanish mission, its crumbling bell towers stark against the morning sky. A new, fierce determination hardened his face. Your father wanted us to destroy the map, he said, but Davies and Blackwood will never stop looking for that mine as long as they believe it's real. Destroying the map won't end it. It will just be a temporary solution. He looked her straight in the eye. We have to end this. For good. We have to use the map. But the poison, she cried. My father said... Your father said the Spanish sealed the mine for a reason, Jed cut in. We're not going there to dig for silver. We're going to do what the Spanish did. We're going to seal it again, this time forever. We'll rig a rock slide, bury the entrance under a mountain of stone so no one can ever find it again. He held up the ornate wooden box. And this? The land grant? We're going to use it to expose Davies and the Blackwood Company for what they are. Thieves and murderers. It was a plan born of desperation, a wild gamble against impossible odds. But it was also a plan for justice, for her father. Shouts from the base of the hill told them the posse was getting closer. The mission, Jed said, grabbing her hand. There are catacombs beneath it. They run for miles. We can lose them in there and come out on the other side of the ridge. They ran up the hill, the mission bell tower their only beacon of hope. They slipped through a rusted iron gate and into the mission's courtyard, just as the first of Davy's men appeared at the bottom of the hill. They found the entrance to the catacombs behind the main altar, a dark, gaping hole in the floor. "Ready?" Jed asked, looking at her, his face grim but resolute. She thought of her father, of the legacy he had truly left her. Not a map to a treasure, but a responsibility. She nodded. They descended into the darkness, the sounds of the posse filling the church above them. They were no longer running. They were on a mission. To clear her father's name, to stop a plague, and to bring down a corrupt empire. The treasure wasn't silver, it was justice, and they were going to dig it up no matter the cost. The catacombs were a cold, silent world of their own. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and centuries of decay. They moved through the oppressive darkness, Jed holding a hastily made torch aloft, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. The shouts of the posse faded above them, replaced by the unnerving silence of the tomb. "The Spanish built these tunnels to connect their missions," Jed explained, his voice a low echo in the narrow passage. "Most of them have collapsed, but this section should lead us out into the canyons north of here. It'll be a long walk to the mine from there, but it's our only way." Eliza followed close behind, the wooden box clutched tight in one hand, her father's letter safe in the other. Every step they took was a step further away from the world she knew, and deeper into a destiny she had never asked for. Her father hadn't been a simple merchant. He'd been a player in a dangerous game, and now she was forced to finish it. Hours passed in the disorienting darkness. They spoke little, saving their energy. The path twisted and turned, sometimes opening into larger burial chambers lined with crumbling niches, other times shrinking to a crawl space they had to squeeze through. Finally, a faint sliver of light appeared ahead. They emerged from the catacombs into the blinding afternoon sun, blinking like creatures born in the dark. They were in a different canyon now, a rugged, isolated place of red rock and twisted skeletal trees. There was no sign of Davies or his men. They had lost them, but they were on foot, with no food, no water, and miles of brutal wilderness between them and the San Esteban mine. "Now comes the hard part," Jed said, studying the map in the letter. He pointed toward a jagged peak on the horizon. "That's Serpent's Tooth. The mine is in the valley on the other side." The journey was a grueling ordeal. The sun was relentless. The ground was treacherous. By the second day, Eliza's feet were blistered, and her throat was raw from thirst. Doubt began to creep in. Jed was strong, a true survivor, but even he was starting to show signs of strain. What if they died out here? What if her father's sacrifice and their insane plan were all for nothing? On the evening of the second day, as they huddled for warmth by a tiny fire, Eliza finally broke the silence that had settled between them. "Why?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Why did you keep searching for all those years? Was it just about the silver?" Jed stared into the flames, his face a mask of old pain. "At first it was," he admitted. "When Silas disappeared, I thought he'd betrayed me. I was angry. I wanted my share. I wanted revenge." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a deep, weary regret. "But the longer I hunted, the more I heard whispers about the Blackwood Company. I heard stories of families forced off their land, of prospectors who vanished. I started to realize this was bigger than just me and Silas. Reading your father's letter, I finally understood. He wasn't running from me. He was running from them. He was trying to protect me too." He reached into his shirt and pulled out a worn leather pouch. From it, he took a tarnished silver locket. He opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and a lock of a child's hair. "Blackwood took my family," Jed said, his voice thick with emotion. "My ranch had a stream that fed one of their bigger operations. They wanted the water rights. I refused to sell. So one night they sent men. There was a fire. My wife, my son, they didn't make it out." He closed the locket with a snap. After that, finding the San Esteban mine wasn't about getting rich. It was about finding something big enough, powerful enough to destroy Blackwood from the inside out. Your father knew it. That land grant is our weapon. Eliza finally understood the fire that drove him. It wasn't greed. It was a grief so profound it had been forged into an unbreakable resolve. Their missions were the same. They were both fighting for the ghosts of their families. The next day they found the mine. It was exactly as her father's letter had described. The entrance was hidden in a deep ravine, marked by a peculiar rock formation that looked like a coiled serpent. A strange metallic smell hung in the air, and the ground around the entrance was unnaturally barren. No plants grew here, no animals left tracks. The poison, Eliza whispered, a shiver running down her spine. We're not going in, Jed said firmly. We're going up. Their plan was simple and desperate. They would climb the steep canyon wall above the mine entrance and find a way to trigger a rock slide, burying the entrance forever. It would take hours, and it would be dangerous. They began the arduous climb, finding handholds and footholds in the crumbling rock face. Halfway up, disaster struck. A ledge that Eliza was standing on gave way. She cried out as she fell, sliding down the scree slope, a shower of rocks clattering around her. Jed scrambled down after her. She was alive, but her ankle was twisted, a sharp, searing pain shooting up her leg. She couldn't put any weight on it. She was trapped, and she couldn't climb. Go, she urged Jed, tears of frustration and pain in her eyes. You have to finish it. Leave me. I'm not leaving you, Jed said, his voice fierce. Never. But they both knew the truth. He couldn't carry her up the cliff face. Their plan was impossible now, and that's when they heard it. The sound of horses from the mouth of the ravine. Marshal Davies and his men had found them. It's over, Walker! Davies' voice boomed, echoing off the canyon walls. He was sitting on his horse, a smug, triumphant look on his face. The captured and wounded auctioneer was tied to a saddle behind him. Nowhere left to run. Give me the grant and the map, and I might just let the girl live. They were cornered, trapped at the entrance to the very place they had come to destroy. Eliza's ankle throbbed. Jed stood protectively in front of her, his revolver in his hand. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. This was it, the end of the line. Davies dismounted, a cruel smile spreading across his face. I'll enjoy this, he said, pulling his own gun. But as he took a step forward, a new voice cut through the tension. A voice that came from above them. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marshal. Everyone looked up. Standing on the cliff top, silhouetted against the sky, were a dozen figures. They were rugged, hard-faced men and women, all armed with rifles, and all of them were aimed directly at Davies and his posse. An older woman with silver-gray hair and eyes as sharp as a hawk's stepped forward. You've been a thorn in the side of this valley for too long, Blackwood, she said, her voice carrying an authority that needed no badge. Davies stared, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Who the hell are you? We're the families you've ruined, the woman replied. The prospectors you've run off. The ranchers you've bled dry. We are the justice this valley has been waiting for. Jed stared up at them, a slow smile spreading across his face. Took you long enough, Maria, he called out. The woman, Maria, smiled back. We got the message you left. It took time to gather everyone. It was another one of Jed's plans, a backup. He had reached out to a network of people who had also been wronged by Blackwood, uniting them. He hadn't just been fighting for himself. He'd been building an army. Davies, realizing he was caught between Jed below and a dozen rifles above, made a desperate move. He lunged for Eliza, grabbing her and pressing the barrel of his gun to her head. Nobody moves, or the girl dies, he screamed. But he underestimated Eliza. Fueled by adrenaline and rage, she brought the heavy wooden box crashing down on his hand. The gun flew from his grasp. In the same motion, she drove her elbow back into his gut. He staggered back, gasping for air, just as Jed tackled him to the ground. From above, the rifles roared to life. The battle was short and decisive. Davies' posse, caught in a crossfire, surrendered quickly. It was over. In the aftermath, as Maria's people secured the prisoners, Jed helped Eliza with her ankle. What now? She asked, looking at the dark, forbidding entrance to the mine. Jed looked up at the cliff face. Now we finish the job. With the help of the other families, they spent the rest of the day rigging the rock slide. At sunset, with everyone at a safe distance, Jed lit the final fuse. They watched as a deafening roar shook the canyon and thousands of tons of rock and earth thundered down, burying the San Esteban mine and its poison forever. Weeks later, the land grant, delivered to a federal judge by Maria, exposed the entire Blackwood Company conspiracy. Davies and the auctioneer faced justice, and their corrupt empire crumbled. The land and the people were finally free. Eliza, her ankle healed, stood with Jed on a hill overlooking the peaceful valley. They had her father's name cleared, and they had brought his true legacy to light. "He would have been proud of you," Jed said quietly. "He'd be proud of us," she corrected, looking at him. The hard, vengeful man she'd first met was gone. In his place was a man who had found peace, a man who had found a new family in the community he had helped save. "So what's next for Jedediah Walker?" she asked. He looked out at the horizon, a real warm smile finally reaching his eyes. "I hear Maria and the others are rebuilding their ranches. They could probably use an extra hand." He turned to her. "What about you?" Eliza thought of the life she'd lost and the new one she had found. She was no longer a victim, no longer a prize. She was a survivor, a fighter. "I think I'll stick around," she said, smiling back. "This valley feels like a good place to start over." They stood there for a long time, not as a captor and his captive, but as partners, watching the sun set on a world they had saved together. Their fight was over, but their story was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of justice, survival, and unexpected twists, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me which twist surprised you the most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.